This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. This presentation is about the Utah State Board of Education investigations into their fellow board member, Natalie Cline. This is part one of James Moss spawned the Sarah Reale email. Both of them are members of the Utah State Board of Education, and the subtitle to this part is The Worm in the Apple of the USBE, the July 12th email. This issue was covered pretty extensively by the media it started in July. This is one of the Salt Lake Tribune's headlines. Utah School Board condemns member Natalie Cline's claims that schools are complicit in sex trafficking and brainwashing. The Utah State Board of Education is an elected body that covers the entire state of Utah. It's a 15-member elected body. And I want to say here, I believe that government is only as sound and as effective as the people who are empowered to run it at any given time. In this case, you'll see that the Chair Moss and board member Reale, Sarah Reale, will trifle with, I believe, with the concepts of democracy, because they're the ones that currently hold the reins of power at the Utah State Board of Education. So I wasn't following this issue as it unfolded 2 months ago, but once it caught my attention, I had to backtrack and read the media accounts, and I submitted several grammar requests, that's what we call them here in Utah, records requests for information. And it kind of made a clear picture to me as to what I believe what was going on. And so what follows are my observations and conclusions that I could glean from the information that I've been given so far. Last week I did a YouTube presentation on this, PowerPoint also, from a different angle, and it was titled Sarah Reale versus Natalie Cline, USBE members. So in this one, I'm looking at it just from the perspective of this email that Sarah Reale wrote. This is her biography that shows up on the webpage of the Utah State Board of Education. And you see here she works for the Salt Lake Community College. She has a master's degree in political science, surprisingly, and she's a director of digital marketing at the Salt Lake Community College. The other character in this saga is James R. Moss, who this says he's an attorney of all things in labor law, which is surprising, as you'll see. So this is the one of the biggest controversies. There were a total of 3 investigations. One of them surrounded this July 4th social media post by board member Natalie Cline. And what happens is they had created a policy a couple years ago, or in 2021, that allows them to, or that I guess provides the steps on how to investigate complaints that come in about a fellow board member. And as you see here in this policy, it lays out 7 steps that I kind of covered in the YouTube video from last week. But basically, these 7 steps, they get complaints, and then one of the first things that happens is it goes into this audit department, the internal audit department, and they create a preliminary analysis. And in this preliminary analysis, they collect all the complaints that come in, and here they grouped them based on they were the same complaint and from different people. And then they do an analysis on it. And in this case, they completed their analysis on July 11th. And why that is significant, as you'll see, is because, as they complete the internal investigation and pass that on to board leadership, all of a sudden this email shows up. And I'll tell you in a second how we know that the email even existed. But I want to characterize this email in this fashion, and you'll see why as I go on. But there's this term called counter knowledge. and it is termed by UK journalist Thompson, and he says that counter knowledge is misinformation packaged to look like fact, and that some critical mass of people believes. The purveyors of counter knowledge are hoping that they have sufficiently impressed or intimidated by the presence of gritty assertions and numbers that will be blindly accepted. In this case, and that's how I would characterize this email, in this case it actually worked. An unsuspecting, you'll see here as I do this presentation, unsuspecting journalists at KSL Radio ran with this story that was leaked to them. And I believe that this illicit email ended up attracting duplicitous board leadership, the two vice chairs, with its patina of knowledge and authority. But a further examination, as I'll show in this presentation, will show that it was just a slapdash collection of complaints already in the investigative process at USBE. You know, another way of putting it is just a sloppy form of circular complaint filing, and the contents of this email ended up being no more reliable than a supermarket tabloid that you can pick up at the grocery store. So, outlined in this presentation also is a response that this leaked email solicited from the media, who were just breathless about this inflated, series of internal investigations that they were hearing about. So, and it produced this kind of Pat Bagley in the Salt Lake Tribune characterized Natalie Cline in this fashion based on the information that was leaked to the media. So, the focus of this presentation, like I said, is going to be the July 12th email that Sarah Reale sent to board leadership. And really, she only sent it to the two vice chairs because as I point out here, Chairman Moss is the one that told her to write the email. And so I'm going to use this modified Venn infographics, this gear shift model, as a way to illustrate the origins of this illicit email and to show its dark influence and the destructive power it yielded over all aspects of this so-called investigation into the social media posts of board member Cline and other aspects of this during this time period of the other two investigations. So in essence, this is a cautionary tale of the damage wrought when those who serve in government seek to undermine it. This is a story really of just government corruption. One of the other things is that I call it the worm in the apple, that the Sarah Reale 712 email is really the worm in the apple of education, or the worm in the apple of the USBE. So I kind of group this in, because as I'm researching this and getting records requests back and reading media accounts, I'm trying to have this make sense to me so I can understand it. So I ended up making an outline and then decided just to post my outline, and this is it, that I was able to, in order for it to make sense to me, I was able to see this email and see the influence that it had. And really the email was just a cloned, as I say here, cloned from the two previous investigations, and I'll explain those as we go on. And then this email is leaked to the KSL Radio. Sarah Reale will tweet parts of her email the night that the KSL story comes out. Then her email gets converted to a third investigation, which is called PA-27. And then it actually generates a separate HR investigation, and then it's the basis where it hatched the USB leadership statement that they ended up releasing also. And so that's just kind of in a nutshell, those are going to be the sections, but this is what it looks like when you start touching all the areas that this influence. So this is my view in this gear shift format, illustrating how this illicit email interrelates and informed all aspects of this so-called investigation into the social media posts by Natalie Cline and a couple of other of her activities. As you'll see in this presentation, you'll have to be intolerably ignorant not to recognize that this worm in the apple email, for what it was, really a politically driven collection of fables designed to defame and discredit board member Cline. Regardless, once it was created, it was inappropriated by high-ranking officials within the USBE, which is what it was intended to do. So to start off here, this Machiavellian move to artificially inflate the case against board member Cline, this was nothing more than a rehashing, like as I said already, of already filed complaints, sprinkled with some rumors and innuendos, supposition, and wild speculation by board member Reale. And in essence, it was a way to conceal the abuse of power that Chairman Moss was going to perpetuate on this entire investigation, or the two investigations against board member Cline. So it was through this leaker to the KSL News that we first learned that the board held an illegal meeting the day before, which was Tuesday, this illicit email first surfaced. And so this illegal board meeting was held by 8 of the members of the USBE, and so it begins. This is the July 12th, or part of the July 12th email that Sarah Reale wrote to the board leadership. And really, when we say board leadership, she only really wrote it to the 2 vice chairs, because Chairman Moss was the one that told her to write it, and apparently it was a result of this illegal meeting that had happened the day before. So, and that's where the title of this presentation comes from, because what's insidious about this is that Chairman Moss, and Sarah Reale, they operated under the color of their authority, utilizing this email to unduly influence, at least I believe, to unduly influence their fellow board members in defiance of policy, law, and even their own conscience of the fellow board members, and just really based on these inflammatory and overwrought statements that Sarah Reale puts in the email. What I don't know is why the 2 vice chairs were gullible enough to believe the contents of this illicit email. It's more likely, that they knew it was worthless, but they were determined to use it as a political weapon to impugn their fellow board member, Natalie Cline, which is sad. This is a July 12 email. So when she strongly urges the board leadership to take action without consent of the full board. In my opinion, she seems to be arguing her own incompetence, because she was so uninformed and inept to recognize that this is false, that what she's telling them is not sustainable by USB policy. And it's one thing that Sarah Reale would be expressing this bizarre and bewildering and incomprehensible explanation of policy. My question is, did the USB leadership consult with the Assistant Attorney General before issuing a public statement? Or, and I guess that's something we'll not know, because if it's written, it's protected by attorney-client privilege, whatever he told them. But even though, if they bypassed him or he gave them bad advice, it's clear that Chairman Moss, who, according to his bio, is a labor attorney himself, he agreed to this completely inaccurate and conspicuously wrong interpretation of policy. So I'll cover more on that in part 2 of this presentation. But on to the purpose, she says here that her stated reason is that Natalie Cline, on her social media post, that her views do not align with the full board. And to me, that makes no sense. That the views of the full board, actually can only be determined by public vote of the board. And if all the board members did not align with board member Cline's views posted on social media, why would that be the basis to have to issue a statement? It's this kind of thinking that, to me, results because Sarah Reale and Chairman Moss are just operating in an echo chamber. Because from a citizen standpoint, we know the difference between a social media post and when board policy is enacted at board meetings. No one is mistaking the two, but in the mind of Sarah Reale, there's a problem. So, and in my opinion, this is just a form of information warfare. Rather than using a rational persuasion to seek the truth, they want to manipulate social media and environments for, I guess, some kind of political advantage. This is one of the most bewildering and incomprehensible explanations put forth for the need for board leadership to act, to protect the unity of the board. What is that? Where is that? This is a government body. They don't have to have unity. They vote on issues, and the majority votes is where the direction of the Utah State Board of Education takes that agency. And you'll note in this email that Sarah Reale, pontificates about integrity when she's just bereft of it herself. In all my research on this issue, I've yet to see how board members, Cline's social media post has done harm to the work or reputation of the USBE. And then who makes that determination? And where is, their reputation? It's not something that's at the end of the day, really, who cares? They're a government agency, a government body, and their decisions will determine what their reputation is and what their work is. And in my opinion, it's Sarah Reale that's done harm to this institution. And here again, even from the beginning, the onset of this, even though at the time, Natalie Cline, when she posts his social media posts, she's required to put a notice on there, not official USBE board policy. But then for some reason, Sarah Reale has to take to social media to say that her opinions do not represent the full board. To me, that's just a joke, because Sarah Reale has no clue, as you'll see, what the full board position is anyways, on anything. So this kind of thought process, or injure the good name of the board, is something that even the board later on at the end of this saga, or we thought was the end of it, on August 7th, will actually quote it, that it's in their policy. And this concept actually comes from the Utah School Boards Association, which is a discussion for another day, but it's ridiculous. So in this email is nothing more than circular reporting, as I already said, and it's cloned from two preliminary analyses that had already been completed by USBE. But before I go into that, I want to talk about this, do an editorial note here about this concept of perverse incentives and the Cobra effect, and how this applies to this policy by USB leadership. And basically, a perverse incentive is an incentive that has an unintended or undesirable result that is contrary to the intentions of its designers. The Cobra effect is the most direct kind of perverse incentive, typically because the incentive unintentionally rewards people for making the issue worse. The term Cobra effect was coined after an occurrence in India during the British rule. The British government, concerned about the number of venomous cobras in Delhi, offered a bounty for every dead cobra. Initially, this was a successful strategy. A large number of snakes were killed for the reward. Eventually, however, enterprising people began to breed cobras for the income. When the government became aware of this, the reward program was scrapped. And when the cobra breeders set their own now worthless snakes free, the wild cobra population further increased. So this applies to how this policy works here at the USBE. It's a good illustration, because at a glance, social media reveals that when this July 4th posting by Natalie Cline happens, on July 7th, the very agency that Natalie Cline sits on a governing board over is soliciting complaints about her social media posts. And of course, Sarah Reale has to jump right in there too. And they probably did it together. Whoever's doing the social media post for Utah State Board of Education, I'm theorizing that, partnered with Sarah and said, hey, you put that up there and then I'll retweet it and tell everybody to file a report against Natalie Cline and this July 4th social media. Any guesses on when the USBE got their first complaint about this social media post? July 7th, according to the internal audit that was created, and it was the preliminary analysis titled PA 26. Said the complaint started coming in, surprisingly, on July 7th. So that's a Cobra effect that this has had. Basically, that was my point, that, that they're actually, in my opinion, creating complaints. I mean, real people are sending them in, but it's at the behest of the USBE itself and Sarah Reale and others in the community begging people to send in complaints about the social media posting. So this one of the complaints that is part of this saga is a Taylorsville complaint. But I want to point out that and what the Taylorsville complaint was a presentation at the Taylorsville Library that was done by board member Cline. It was a protected document, meaning that it was not released to the media or the public until the second week of August at the very earliest. So at the time, this is a protected document. It was completed July 10th and then forwarded to board leadership. And keep these dates in mind, because remember, the email from Sarah Reale comes out on July 12th. And I'm accusing Sarah Reale of just rehashing these investigative reports that were already completed. So here's an example of it. Remember, the PA 25 is the preliminary analysis 25, which is a Taylorville complaint. And, I did get a copy of it earlier at the beginning of August, second week of August, and I could compare it to her email that I also received through a records request. But on the left is the preliminary analysis, and on the right is her email that she sent to the two vice chairs of the board. And she says that Member Jackson immediately sent the USB audit a recollection of what Member Cline said. So basically, she's telling them in the email that one of the things that Member Cline did was this presentation, as though that's something new. But it was in this preliminary analysis that board leadership has, and clearly Sarah Reale even has. There's another preliminary analysis, which is PA 26. Also at the time was a protected document, not released to the public or the media, but board leadership had it. It's a Facebook complaint, which is the one that I've been showing, that came out July 4th. And in this one, Sarah Reale, on her email on 7/12 to the two vice chairs, she's aware of how many complaints are in the preliminary analysis. So clearly she's read it. She knows of it. And all she's doing is rehashing it here in her email. Disrespectful social media activity. So there's really nothing new, is what I'm saying, in this email. And what's interesting is that, she quotes them. But again, understand that the board leadership has these preliminary analysis in their possession at the time that they received this email. And then here is in the PA 26, it's the social media post, and this is in her email that she gives to the board leadership. She also goes over this thing, and I covered this last week, and so I'm just going to skip through it, but just mention it here, that she claims that her actions, that Natalie Cline's actions are that they violate board bylaws. But, the internal audit already cleared her of that. And the board, again, leadership has these in her possession and is demonstrated. So does Sarah Reale. So keep in mind that this, again, that after on the 11th, when at least the PA 26 on July 10th, the PA-25 was completed. PA-26 is completed. And, now what I think, in my opinion, what I think was going on is that they realized that these internal audits were going to clear Natalie Cline of any wrongdoing in terms of the policies. And so they ended up convening this illegal meeting Tuesday night and then coming up with this idea of this illicit email that was sent to the vice chairs on July 12th. And I think they were banking on the fact that, it would have an effect and overshadow the objectivity of the two internal audits that were completed. So here we go on this section of the infograph that I made, and we'll cover this. The KSL leak. So they are the ones that it's through KSL radio. This was leaked. We find out that a lot of their information came from this email that I'm talking about, and that's the purpose of this presentation. So here, I did a records request for about 3 weeks ago. Did a records request for the email that was mentioned in the KSL story, and I get a copy of it. And after I read it, I sent an email to board member Sarah Reale. And I tell her, hey, I got a copy. I just sent her this back in August 24th. I said, I got a copy of your email. And, I tell her, your email speaks of integrity and unity of the current USBE and the reputation of USBE. In case you haven't noticed, the reputation of USBE is in the toilet, due in large part to the unfolding drama with the interplay of power and personality amongst USBE board members. Leaking information to the media about an ongoing internal personnel investigation did considerable damage to the very reputation you proclaim to be the guardian of. And I go on to tell her, for the most part, the public sees that you and others on the board are motivated by political bias and personal animus in your relentless quest to prove your fellow board member and a legitimate elected official. And in that quest, you have clearly abandoned objectivity and suspended all sense of fairness. And it is clear from your email that you spend it, and I go on. So anyways, I asked her about, can you help me understand what was the purpose of beguiling KSL Radio into doing a story on an official internal personnel investigation that was still ongoing? And her reply is that, Michael, I'm not sure of your intentions, but since you served as an elected official, all of my USBE emails are public, and journalists have the freedom and right to grammar requests. So I did a grammar request. She implicated the records officer, saying that he's the one that gave it to KSL. So I did a grammar request for KSL's the records request they submitted and what did they get back. And I also informed the records officer that she was implicating him in giving her email to KSL. And he said, here's what I gave KSL. And board member Reale's email was not responsive to any KSL request received by USBE. So here's a copy of the KSL News grammar request or records request that they submitted to the USBE. So understand, on July 13th in the morning at 7:46 a.m., they submit this records request for all records of all complaints filed with the Internal Audit Department against Natalie Cline. And so I'm thinking that, when they submit this, that afternoon they go ahead and report about the email that they have and about all the information that they've obtained about what they're actually asking for, they report on. So before they even have them in their possession, they're going to go ahead and report on these. But this is where we know they got it all from the leaker, and they got a copy of the email from the leaker, because what happens is they didn't get it from the records officer, because the following day he replies to KSL and he gives them information, but he says, in addition, the records related to issues 25 to 27 are classified as protected. And what he's talking about is what I already showed you, the preliminary analysis 25, the preliminary analysis 26, and the preliminary analysis 27 is actually the email that was converted into a new complaint. So the July 12 email ends up being the preliminary analysis 27. So KSL didn't get this at all. And I think they were banking on the fact that they would receive it and then they could say that's where the information came from, but that's not what happened. They didn't receive it at this time. And so, they're left to having to rely on the leaker and the email. We don't, to this day, I don't know, publicly we don't know who gave them the Sarah Reale email. But at the time that this preliminary analysis, according to the records officer, it was protected. So nobody could see it. The preliminary analysis 26 that was complete on July 11th was protected. And then there was the preliminary analysis 27, which is a Sarah Reale complaint, was actually created. Her email was on 7/12. This was actually created on 7/13. And then here's the attachments that the records officer sent to KSL. He gives them the information, and this is like a table of contents. And he says right here that the 25, 26, and 27, the preliminary analysis, are pending board policy because the investigation is still ongoing. So nobody, including me and the media, received copies of these because they were protected documents because an investigation was ongoing. And KSL even tells us when their story broke that they're awaiting details of public records requests outlining the natures of those complaints. Well, they never got them officially. I want to point out here's just me pointing out that the top two issues that they talk about, the PA-25 and PA-26, they're aware of all the details. And then they even say here that over here on the right, that some recent comments over staff gender orientation, which is PA-25, and recent social media posts, which is PA-26, and one other unknown situation, that's PA-27. They don't know the details of it because it was actually created later that afternoon that their story aired. So these people, whoever's talking to KSL, they have up to the minute insider information on what's happening. Along with this issue of confidentiality, I want to point out that when the process is being followed for these investigations, that one of the things that the policy 2005 calls for is that if board leadership wants to move forward with this issue, so board leadership, according, and here's a timeline that, we can take the PA-26, and it was completed and given to board leadership on 7/11, which is then that night they had this illegal meeting with over half of the board. And then on the 7/12 is when the Sarah Reale email surfaces. But on 7/13, Natalie Cline, who is the quote unquote accused in this issue, gets a letter from the Assistant Attorney General who represents the USBE, and he tells her, we'd like to have your side of the story because these allegations about the Facebook issue, and he actually gives her another email that same afternoon about the Taylorsville one, and says that the leadership has determined they're going to move forward with this investigation. And he tells her right here, present it to the entire board in an executive session. So we want to hear your side of the story. And he says, finally, keep this matter, including your response, confidential, is what he tells her, which is ironic because when he sends this email, check this out. This story actually comes out at 4:20 p.m. on the 13th, and he sends this email at 5:18 p.m. on the same day. I don't think he was aware. I think he was at work doing work, and wasn't listening to KSL radio, and he was unaware that this story was breaking. And they'll maintain this whole thing even later on, that these are preliminary internal audits that Cline, released, because there's this other issue that happened on the 19th of July where board member Cline did release it because she was trying to point out that they cleared her of any wrongdoing, but the communications coordinator for USBE is saying, that these are internal audits and should not have been released, and that they're usually kept private. As late as July 27th, and in response to my records request, they're telling me that they're not giving them to me because the preliminary analysis is protected and confidential because the investigation is still ongoing. So, but nobody, as far as I can see, and I need to dive into a little more, nobody cares at USBE that there was a leak on July 13th, that her email was leaked. And even after this whole thing supposedly was supposed to be wrapped up and they found no wrongdoing, as the entire board found no wrongdoing, that they're going to, the communications, Kelsey James is going to call out Natalie Cline for premature conclusions about this confidential investigation. My point is, there was nothing confidential about this after the emails leaked on July 13th, but after this, the leaked email came out, and I think that's what its purpose was, to sidestep the confidentiality that's built into this policy, and that anybody, of any understanding knows that's how personnel investigations occur. So, even the Salt Lake Tribune on July 13th is just saying, hey, we don't know anything. We did a records request, but we're just going on what KSL is telling everybody. The other point I just want to make that's really not in this outline is just that we know that when KSL asked what's next, that board chair Moss did not confirm whether he plans to bring the issue in front of the full board for discussion. And, we know that she got the letter because after I did records requests, I can line things up on a timeline. And they had already made the decision. Board leadership made the decision. So Moss was already aware that they were going to take this to the full board. But, he wants to try to look objective to KSL. So in retrospect, his public assurances that they're following the process was really nothing more than a carefully crafted deception that afforded him, a clever way and a clandestine way to evade public disclosure of his scheme that he had hatched with this leaked email that came out on the day of this KSL story. So let's go on to the last section that I'll cover in this part one, is that instead of calling out KSL for reporting on Twitter, Sarah Reale gives no public indication that she's worried about the fact that her email got leaked to KSL. I wonder why. So what's interesting though is that I just want to point out that when she writes this letter, this illicit email, if you will, to the leadership the day before, she tells them, make a public statement, that her views, and it's like, well, why insist that they do it when you did it yourself? And she tweets that night. So when the KSL story comes out, the member Cline is under internal board investigation. Sarah Reale retweets it and quotes her email in it. These are from her email. She just cuts and pasted. Right into tweets. So there's nothing, she's okay with just perpetuating these rumors, innuendo, and supposition and gossip. And that's really not proof that any policy or law has been violated. But she's going to be one of the ones to make that determination. But here she is expressing determinations. And here she goes, that she's casting judgment on this behavior and these appropriate actions when on this day, in the process, they're asking the quote-unquote accused for her side of the story. So Sarah Reale hasn't even heard Natalie Cline, her fellow board member, side of the story, but she's already publicly judging the outcome of her actions. So, this is what's unfortunate about this. So I'm going to close this section 1, and I said this last week, but I'm going to say it again because it makes a little more sense now, that it's fundamentally wrong and unethical for USBE members to supervise a case in which they are the accuser, chief witness, and judge. In our criminal justice system, we would never allow a lawyer to be the victim, witness, investigator, prosecutor, and judge all rolled up in one. Yet USBE members have been allowed to play each of these roles in the case against their fellow board member, Cline. Many of the USBE members have demonstrated a conflict of interest so acute that no credible argument can be made in their favor. It is perversely ironic that in the face of these conflicts of interest, they still could not find board member Cline was in violation of any policy or law, which I'll cover in part 2. But basically, I kind of outlined here how from the inception of an internal audit even being created, it's Sarah Reale that's soliciting the complaints along with probably Kelsey James, who's a communications director, begging people to send in complaints on that social media post. And then you see that it's Sarah Reale that's bastardizing this whole process in the middle and from its beginning to its very end. So, as I said in the last week's posting, is that back in the day when I was on the school board, I was able to get a state law passed because I was subjected to this kind of treatment by local board policy to try to silence me. But I was able to get a state law passed that said that a board member serves and represents the residents of the local school board member's district, and that service and representation may not be restricted or impaired by the local board member's membership on or obligation to the local school board. So my proposal is that we're going to get some legislation passed, hopefully this session, that have some language like this apply to state school board members, because this nonsense that they're doing, we need to help them get out of that business of trying to silence each other. And so stay tuned. Part 2 will come out probably next week, and we'll cover the left side of the infographic that I showed earlier. See you then.